First, thank you all for coming. I'm Marcy Shore. I'm here from Yale University, and I frequently, or as frequently as I can over the past decade or so, hang out at IWM. My real job is at Yale University, and I am very happy to be welcoming you here tonight on behalf of myself, on behalf of our rector, Shalini Randeria, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, especially on behalf of my partners in crime, that is to say my colleagues, Ludger Hagedorn and Tatiana Zhuzhenko and Kate Younger, who organized this conference with me. In fact, since they were here and I was in New Haven, they actually did all of the hard work, and I just had some ideas now and then. Let me just take a brief moment and explain to you what the concept of this conference is. I think it is the inaugural moment of collaboration between two of the projects that the Institute for the Human Sciences oversees, one of which is Ukraine and European Dialogue, and that's run by Tatiana Zhuzhenko and Kate Younger, and one of which is the philosophical work of Jan Patočka, including overseeing the Jan Patočka archive, and that is run by Ludger Hagedorn. And the idea of bringing these two projects together in this conference is something that has been particularly important to me, and I'll just take 2 minutes and explain to you why. I have long been interested in and a historian of, to some extent, Central European philosophy, in particular that current of Central European philosophy represented by the late Czech philosopher Jan Patočka. And one of the things that has fascinated me about this tradition of Central European philosophy is that precisely after 1968 and the collapse of faith in Marxism as the last grand narrative, this common European tradition of continental philosophy, of phenomenology turned existentialism, takes very different directions in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. In Western Europe, very famously, especially in France, it takes the direction of postmodernism in general, post-structuralism more particularly, which is a loss of faith in the possibility of truth as something that is stable, as something that one can hold on to, as something that is ontologically real. And for philosophers like Derrida, it was precisely this skepticism, this disbelief in the fact that there was such a thing as a kind of stable truth that we could hold on to, that was our last defense against, and in fact, an antidote to the totalitarian thinking that gave us the totalitarian nightmares of the 20th century. So it was very much a philosophical development that originated in the critical sensibility of the left. In Eastern Europe, and in particular among philosophers living under communism in the 70s and 80s, drawing on the same tradition, there was an insistence that even at a time when we have lost faith in the possibilities of overarching grand narratives that tie everything together and make everything make sense, even at a time when no one any longer believes in the wholeness that Hegel had promised, nonetheless, we have to hold on to a faith in truth. And even if we know that we will never actually get a hold of that truth in such a way that we can have it in our hands and put it in our pocket, we have to believe that it exists, and we have to keep trying to get there. We have to keep searching. So this question of truth, the possibility of truth, the reality of truth, became arguably the most important kind of philosophical division between the main current in continental philosophy between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And so it is perhaps part of the irony of fate that precisely this skepticism towards truth that originated in the critical sensibility of the left has suddenly kind of come back to haunt us, now coming from Eastern Europe, and in particular from Russia and Ukraine, as we've seen it played out in the past few years, the same idea that has originated in the critical sensibility of the left has now become, in some sense, a weapon of the right, and something that is threatening a kind of new postmodern neo-totalitarian encroachment. Whether that is part of the irony of fate or part of some logical development, I will leave up to all of you to think about. But the way in which the revolution and subsequently the war in the Donbass in Ukraine has laid bare these questions about what we are now calling post-truth or post-factuality, and how we are to understand the world and the possibility of ethics in an absence of the face of truth, is, I think, arguably the most pressing philosophical question of our current moment of crisis on both sides of the Atlantic. So I was particularly thrilled that we could bring together the Ukraine and European Dialogue Program and the philosophical work of Jan Patočka program to look at these issues both very materially and very concretely, having to do with what is happening and how this boundary between truth and fiction is being effaced in Russia and Ukraine, and to tease out some of the larger kind of philosophical and existential implications of what is happening in concrete terms. And I am now going to turn this over to our moderator, Angelina Kariakina, who is editor-in-chief of the news division at Hromadske, and I will then let her say a few words about Hromadske, which is an independent news station in Ukraine, and introduce our speakers, Ivan Krastev and Peter Pomerantsev. So thank you very much again for coming.
Thank you, Marcy, so much. Is it working, or should I? I don't need. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Marcy, so much, and it's my honor and great pleasure to be here as a fellow at the Institute, and also to be on this distinguished panel with the writers that I do admire. Just a few words about Hromadske. It's quite an interesting phenomenon in terms of media, and I would say also as an institution, because we're both a media and an NGO. So we're facing all sorts of distrust towards institution as a media and an NGO. Something that I hope we will be talking about a little later. So this is an initiative created by independent journalists in 2013. A group of independent journalists decided that they want to work independently, because Ukrainian media landscape is specific, and the specific is that it's basically owned by the oligarchs. So they created this TV channel, and they named it Hromadske, which in English means public. At that time, we didn't have a public broadcaster, and that was kind of a path that we were trying to take and create either a public television or something that would operate in the ecosystem of public broadcasting. And then Maidan came, and we were streaming from Maidan all the time. So we mostly became known as Maidan streamers or Maidan media. Then the war came, and we went to war. And again, we got very much associated with the turmoil and with all those events. But what Hromadske is telling about, I would say, that is transformation, and that is something that Peter helped us to define. So we are talking and we are explaining what kind of transformations Ukraine face, both negative transformations and positive transformations. We operate in English, Russian, and Ukrainian, and we really hope that helps us reach as much people as possible. And I think that's enough about Hromadske. You can check it online, hromadske.ua. I am very much happy to present our panelists. It's Ivan Krastev. He's the chairman of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia, Bulgaria, a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Science here in Vienna. He's also on the board of trustees of the European Council of Foreign Affairs Relations and the Erste Foundation, and as well as the advisory councils of the Open Society Foundations, the Center of European Policy Analysis, and the European Cultural Foundation. His latest books are Democracy Disrupted, The Politics of Global Protest, and After Europe. And he's also a contributing writer to the International New York Times. I hope that's all correct. Peter Pomerantsev is the visiting senior fellow at the Institute of Global Affairs, London School of Economics. Peter is a TV producer, a journalist, author of Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, The Surreal Heart of the New Russia. And he has been writing also for a number of outlets, London Review of Books, The Atlantic, Newsweek, Financial Times, and others. And myself already presented as a journalist, so what I mainly do is tell stories or edit them. And I think I'm gonna start out with a story. And I hope that could be a nice starting point for our conversation. So it's March 2014. Me and my cameraman, Roman, are covering unrest in Kharkiv, eastern Ukraine. And Roman, I have to tell you, is someone who really likes to talk. You will know why it matters a little bit later. We're traveling to Kharkiv, where a group of guys known as a plot is clashing and paranoidally looking for Nazis in Kharkiv. Oplot will later become a group at the avant-garde of this Russian Spring movement, but so far they're just this criminal-affiliated group in Kharkiv. And we're there covering this clash. It's obvious which side they're on in this huge geopolitical conflict. And Roman, as I already said, he really likes to talk. He mentions that we work for Euronews. This crowd hears that it's something with Euro, and they attack us. They scream Euro sluts, they have knives, they have guns, and Roman and I really have to run for our lives. Then our next destination had to be Donetsk. And of course, after they had us on cameras and they had our faces, there was no chance that it wasn't really smart to spend this night in Kharkiv, and we decided to head to Donetsk right away. So we get a taxi, we jump in, and we head to Donetsk. And Roman continues to talk to the taxi driver. Roman is under huge impression. And he talks and talks that he's a journalist from Kiev, that he was covering Maidan this, Maidan that, democracy this, democracy that. And I hear some really dark silence, and the taxi driver doesn't say anything. And it's a huge, it's a long distance. It's almost 5 or 6 hours drive from Kharkiv to Donetsk. So Roman is talking, I'm listening, taxi driver is listening. Suddenly I hear his radio talking. And it's not actually radio, it's an app called Zello. It's something that was used by the activists on both sides, if we may say that there were two sides of these events. And they were using this application to communicate with each other. So I hear this Zello, like psh, psh, like a walkie-talkie, and they're saying, Pravoseki are coming. Be aware. Kharkiv, be aware. I understand that this guy is in the group of those who are hunting or expecting someone to come from Maidan and attack Kharkiv. So it's in a plot-controlled taxi, and we're inside, and it's 5 hours drive, and it's no way, and Roman is talking, no way I can get out of this situation. So finally, Roman understands that it's time to shut up, and he shuts up. And I think, okay, it's time for me to start the talk. And we start talking. I ask him, does he believe in the fact that Pravy sector is coming and is going to kill all the Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine? And he tells me, yes, of course, I've seen these horrific pictures from Maidan in Kiev, and it's just unspeakable what they were doing, and doing all the Nazi salutes and things like that. And I asked him, okay, do you know how many people are there in Pravy sector? Because it was at that time quite a small group of people, quite marginal, right-wing youngsters and football fans. So I couldn't imagine themselves getting on like tens of buses and going there to Kharkiv. And he said, yeah, well, from what I heard, they were trained in military camps in the Baltics, so I expect them to be really armed and dangerous, and I think that's like 10 or at least 15 buses. Let me check. Yeah, it's like 4 are coming already. And then I asked him, okay, but what about Maidan? Why do you think people came to streets? And he starts, and we get into this conversation, which actually has no sense. It makes no sense because he cannot make any coherent arguments. We jump from Yanukovych to IMF, and then from NATO into these military camps, and then from Russian-speaking population suddenly to something else, which also didn't make any sense. And I couldn't get this conversation, I couldn't get this like logical path where we could get to at least one coherent argument. And what the driver was really talking about, what he was appealing to, there was something that I couldn't give him. He was appealing to emotions, and I was appealing to facts. He was appealing to fear, and I couldn't give him anything with my facts. It was just, it wasn't a dialogue at all. So as we were talking, of course, I was deleting all the pictures from Maidan that I had on my phone, and I was renaming all the names I had in my phone book from the self-defense of Maidan and all the MPs and everything. And I was sure that the guy will hand us over to another group, a separatist group in Donetsk. But my risk assessment was really wrong. He got us to Kharkiv. He was absolutely okay with the fact that we had a different point of view. But the feeling that I got that this dialogue is impossible was still with me. So he left into this darkness of this emerging Novorossiya or whatever it was. And we were there in Donetsk, but that's another story. But what I thought is that how do I, as a media representative, how do I handle this guy, and how do I handle his friends, how do I handle his family, how do I talk to them? I don't have a language to talk to them. They don't understand my language. And I thought, is it something new that we're facing? Is it something new that we have to think of, and we have to come up with some new decision, new language, and new discourse to get these people talking to us and listening to us. You don't have to go into the story. You can forget about it. It was just a starting point for us to talk. Do you think that that the paradigm in which this taxi driver was thinking, that it was something really new, or it's something that we already faced and we can work with? Peter.
Yeah, Angelina, I'm kind of with the taxi driver here. For most of us, and I think you might be the exception here, facts are very unpleasant things. Yeah? Facts tell you that you're going to die. Facts tell you that you're not as good looking as you might want to be. Facts tell you that you're overweight. Facts are not nice. Yeah? Why would somebody want facts? It's crazy. Facts can, and this is the only thing they have going for them, they can be quite useful. We don't have a fact-free discourse around building a bridge, unless it's the Kerchensky Mosque. But apart from that, when we build a bridge, we talk about facts, because we're doing something, we're getting somewhere, and need facts to prove it, or the bridge will collapse. So I think facts are very tied to conversation about getting somewhere. Now, go back to the Soviet Union, because something I've looked a lot at is how propaganda has changed between the Soviet Union and Putin's Russia, between Nixon and Trump. In the Cold War, we had a discourse where we had a propaganda where there was lots of lies. But when the Soviets lied, they went to incredible lengths to try to make their facts look real, to make their lies look real. See, I'm getting confused now. So, for example, when they would do a story that the CIA had a false story, created AIDS as a weapon, they planted that story in Indian newspapers. They found these kind of pseudoscientists to prove it. They wanted to make their lies look real.
It took time. Yeah.
It took time. They were embarrassed when they were found out. When Reagan told Gorbachev, "Why are you lying about this?" He was like, "The Soviet Union lied." They would even lie about their economic facts. They were trying to prove that they were moving towards a communist utopia. Maybe nobody in the Soviet Union believed in it, but there was still a veneer of trying to pretend you're getting somewhere. Same with the Americans. When they lied, they still tried to make their lies look real because they were trying to prove something, that their society was going somewhere. Come to today. When Putin lies, he doesn't care that people catch him out on lying. Actually, he's reveling in the idea that I don't care if you catch me. I don't care of the difference between facts and lies. Same with Trump. Trump revels in the fact that he's lying and he doesn't care. There's a celebration of the release from facts, which might at some very deep level be the kind of the release from, the sense of impending death. That's the party that they're doing, yeah? Facts are thrown out. So in order to create, and look what they have in common. Neither of them have an idea of the future. Neither Trump nor Putin have any idea of where they're going. They're both nostalgists, and nostalgia is already a virtual reality where you can float away in a dream, where facts really don't matter. So we've lost a conversation where we're trying to get somewhere at the highest political level. And that's reflected in journalism as well, I think. So how in journalism do we generate a conversation where we're going somewhere? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Where we're not simply debating with people. I'm right, you're right, I'm right, you're right. It can go back and forwards. You don't get anywhere. How do we construct conversations where we're trying to move into some idea of the future? Now, there's a whole movement in Denmark, of all places, where they don't really have a problem with democracy, but it's originated in Denmark called constructive news, yeah? Where the whole idea is that the role of the journalists slightly changes. Yeah? A journalist is still someone who's trying to find out the facts, speaking truth to power, risking their lives, all that remains. But the way they approach stories, or the way they approach debates on TV, is to always find ways of moving forward. So if you're doing a debate, you don't just get the Republican and the Democrat to fight against each other, which is what we usually do. And then in Newsnight we go, and that's all we have time for today. You construct the whole debate so you force them into a situation where they have to talk about how they're going to change things and are then held responsible for it. Actually, Dominic Cummings, the guy who created Brexit, talks about this a lot as well. It was so easy to manipulate the British media on Brexit because they never forced you to be responsible for anything or to really say what's going to happen. Yeah? So they could bullshit Brexit. So that's really hard for journalists, because journalists think of themselves as kind of like people who just reflect what's going on in the world, and that's the end of their job. And maybe one part of journalists' job now is to approach stories and debates and news in a slightly different way. Now, that's very hard to do, and I know a lot of journalists feel very uncomfortable with it, but that might be a way forward.
So you're saying what's new is that the truth and the fact doesn't matter anymore, unlike
I'm sure that's
unlike the time of Soviet propaganda.
I'm sure if we go back in history, we'll find other periods like this. But I'm talking the last sort of 20, 30 years or 40 years, I think that's the big shift.
Ivan, do you agree?
I agree. First, on your story, I understand that being silent is good, because if you're driving, but let's see, I do believe that Peter touched on something that is important for me, and this is the story. Like everybody, I'm worried by post-truths. I'm also worried by the way we talk about post-truths, because this is one of the words that people start to use when they don't know exactly what they want to say. For example, is it about truth at the end of the day? We have been all the time trying to say what people agree or disagree. People have been disagreeing. But I do believe Peter touched on two things that are very important in my understanding. First is, you do not have future. And because you do not have a strong ideologies, because future is a normative claim about, ideology is a normative claim about the future, you have more and more political identity based on conspiracy theories. Do you know what is the strongest predicator who voted for the governing now party in Poland on the last elections? It was not education, it was not income, it was not age. It was the belief that what happened in Katyn was assassination. Where is the difference between ideology, even an awful ideology, and conspiracy theory? You can be a dissident in the ideology, you cannot be a dissident in conspiracy theory, because conspiracy theory is the explanation of the world without normative dimension. I'm telling you who is doing this to us, but there is not a normative dimension, what is good and what is bad, and exactly there is no future. I'm saying this because I do believe that the major difference in the way basically the narrative are constructed during the Cold War and now is they can be as misleading then, but they were based on consistency. Now you have a type of a presentation in which you don't need to be consistent. If you basically try to lie about something, before you should lie about everything. You should try to create a consistent idea of the world, why it is this. And of course, during the Cold War, you have these propaganda clashes and you have a different interpretation, and the same facts are going to be interpreted totally differently. And by the way, we should not try to pretend that everything is happening just now. When I see people basically being totally shocked by the Russians hacking in American elections, I know at least some of you know something. Do you know what is the Zinoviev letter? In 1924, 4 days before the parliamentary elections in Britain, one of the conservative newspapers published a letter which was as if written by the head of the Comintern then, Grigory Zinoviev, that basically was telling the story how the communists through the Labour Party are going to overtake Britain. And this became a major issue. Conservatives won the elections. Historians now are making a point that Labour didn't lose much out of this, to be honest, on the level of the vote. What was the major impact of the Zinoviev letter, which appeared to be a fake, was that Labour didn't understand why they lost. Because they believe all the time that they lost because of the Zinoviev letter and they lost because of something else. I'm saying this because they are provocation in history, they have been interference in other people's elections. But what we start to fear, in my view, and this is the interesting story, how the post-truth is related to Russia. For years, people, I mean after 1989, people like or dislike, mostly dislike what is happening in Russia, but what they dislike, they have been explaining as something that comes from the past. You go to Russia, basically, when you go to Soviet Union, you want to see the world in the way it's going to be. You can like it or dislike it. When you go to Russia after 1989, you're seeing the world as it was. And then in 2014, after Crimea, I do believe that the West was shocked that the Russia probably is not coming from the past, but is coming from the future. And from this point of view, that many things that they start to fear in their own societies, basically they see embodied there. And I'm not talking simply in terms of authoritarian trends and others, but for reasons that I do believe Peter very well is explaining in his book. Paradoxically, it was Russia where in 1990s you have the classical form of applied postmodernism. Let's give you an example. You come in a reality which is first after 1989, where people don't believe in ideologies anymore. The very word ideology is basically perceived as a kind of a dirty word. By the way, Mr. Dugin's book published in 1990 was not about Eurasianism, it's called Conspirology. And the idea is that simply competitive narratives, and this is why also the border between the art and the politics was totally destroyed in the 1990s. Maxim is going to remember it very well when we talk about provocation and fakes. In 1996, during the Yeltsin elections, a newspaper was published in a big 1,000 circulation, as if being published by the Communist Party, which claimed that they're going to nationalize the apartments that had been just privatized. And when you're asking basically people, and this was the Yeltsin campaign, so do you see a moral issue? They said no, because it's about effectiveness, because we should stop that. And as a result of it, you have many famous artists, including Mr. Pelevin, that started to work for political projects. The figure of the political technologist that became so dominant in Russia in the 1990s was a very strange mixture between an artist and political consultant. And the story and the difference between art and politics is art is not about truth, or it's about some ultimate truth, but it's not about factual truth for sure. And as a result of it in 1999, when my friend Mr. Pavlovsky and Marat Gelman, famous figure in artistic world of Russia, started a campaign to destroy the mayor of Moscow, Mr. Ushkov. Not that Mr. Ushkov should not have been destroyed. But when they did it, after the campaign was over, they published an exhibition called Compromat as a Literary Genre. And I do believe this breaking the border between art and politics, where exactly because there is no future project, Everything is about the impression that you can create, the impact of the people. Everything is competing in narratives, and nobody should be responsible morally for what is happening. Why it worked, and I do believe Marcy very much touched on this, because at the same time, in the Western universities, the idea of the moral relativism was also becoming critically important, because the idea was having one truth means that authority is too strong. And I do believe that the paradox of the situation which we see is that by destroying the gatekeepers, the mainstream media and others, we created a situation in which the crisis of authority ended up with the political powers that are becoming extremely manipulative, totally manipulative. And the big data is the biggest kind of embodiment of this, in which you cannot keep people and parties responsible for anything, because they said, we don't trust anything. We basically want to win the elections. Don't ask me what I have said yesterday. And I do believe this is the most disturbing about President Trump. And I'm going, just before ending, make some also one point of President Putin. The problem with Mr. Trump is not that he's very much extreme, because he's extreme in his inconsistency. You cannot basically attached any type of a consistent view of the world, and he's going to basically say one thing today, he's going to say totally different things tomorrow. The only thing that is extreme is basically the claim that you cannot keep me responsible for what I said. It's not connected to what I'll do. But this created a world in which people totally discovered, behind the coverage of being empowered by new media, by technology and all this, that they're totally losing any control over their political leaders, because any ideology creates a form of control, because at least the government should pretend on the discursive level that they're doing this or that. And now you have a government that are like kids. They're just enjoying themselves. And I do believe this created this incredible type of tension, and this is why the idea of the post-truth, in my view, is much more the problem of the new relationship between the citizens and governments. And I talk about political governments. It starts very much to be about companies and others. And I'm going to end up here and trying to make just this last reference to President Putin. For me, there are two things that struck me about President Putin all these years that I have been following Russian professionally. The first thing that struck me was when he divorced. To be honest, I was much more struck and shocked than after the invasion of Crimea, because it was but I'm not saying this as a joke, because it was so much non-Putin story. He's so kind of a state and so on, and his wife was not pressing on him much.
He has a granddaughter, you know.
Yeah, he's a now grandfather, we know, and this is a new image. But my story is why you're divorcing. And then I understand that something is going on. But the second story is, he told both the Chancellor Merkel, the Foreign Minister Steinmeier, that there were not Russian troops in Crimea at the very same moment when he knew that they have the photos of these special forces and probably know the names of these forces, some of the soldiers. So normally in politics, you're lying when there is a certain level of deniability. You're lying something that cannot be proved. You're lying about intentions, you can lie about the informations, but and this is a very high risk, because the relations on such high political level, to a certain extent, is based on personal trust, and at least, as one of the stories say, one of the leaders has told him, listen, you should decide who you are, a president of a great power or middle-level intelligence officer. But why he did it? One is probably because of uncertainty. He himself has not decided what he's going to do next. But second, I do believe after that he developed this ideology that I'm lying in order to be called a liar. And then I'm going to say liar like you, in the way you lied about the weapons for mass destruction in Iraq. About this and that, and then you create this level in which the talk about what is going on is totally replaced by mutual accusations, in which nobody is interested in truth anymore. The only problem is that everybody is going to say that the other side is not doing it anymore, does not have any moral claim to make any statement that pretends to be true. I'm saying this because this is also the structure of the modern political talk shows. In the modern political talk shows, people are not invited in order to see what is the truth about what is going on. They invited in order basically to have a fight, and this fight should be interesting, and people were put there, and none of the people in the show should change his view on the basis of argument. And I'm saying this because I do believe this is the most dangerous thing happening in democracy. Democracy is not possible if people are not ready to change their view on the basis of argument. I do believe that if there are going to be a monument of democracy one day, it should be the monument of a citizen who was ready to change his view on the basis of argument or different experience. And this is why, in my view, the problem of the post-truth is that we are living in a situation in which the personal experience is much more limited. Most of the time, we are asked to believe about things that we cannot check ourselves, our neighbors don't know, and at the same time, we are so mistrustful, and our relations to power, the default option is mistrust. So then, on one side, power is trying to monopolize basically you have a government-sponsored theories, because the government-sponsored conspiracy theories is the way to resurrect information borders in which the flow of information is going here and there. So from this point of view, this is what I do believe is behind this incredible nervousness you can feel in different parts of society, particularly of democratic societies, of what we're talking about. And yeah, this is at least my story, which is the internal tension and nothing more.
I think it's interesting to talk about what contributes actually to the rise of that paranoid citizen that you're talking about. But maybe we could discuss it a little bit later. There's an interesting point you made. You mentioned these political scientist type, which is much about Mr. Surkov himself, who is this kind of a writer, artist, philosopher, and political scientist and a functioner, who is believed to be the author of this concept of sovereign democracy or whatever it is, and who is believed to be the creator of that narrative that is sort of counter-narrative to what the West is giving and what the Russia today is transmitting or whatever it is. And I think Ukraine is trapped in that thing, trying to create its own narrative from being not what Russia is about. But basically what you're saying is Russia doesn't know what it is about. Is it the clash of narratives that also contributes to that uncertainty and is it something that we're doing really wrong in trying to define ourselves of what of Russia is not?
I don't know, when I go to Ukraine, and I hate Westerners who sort of have become experts on Ukraine. And I was born there. I was, in my case. I've never lived there, therefore I understand it. But I come back with a repeating paradox, which is a paradox based on its colonial experience. So because it's a country where there's always been an occupier, Soviet, Russian, Romanian, Austrian, Polish, and so on, there is a real gap and a lack of trust between the people and the power, because the power is always a colonial power. Unlike in Russia, where to progress, you have to enter the pyramid of power, and there really is no other way. In Ukraine, it's the opposite. You even pay bribes differently. You push power away. Here's your 20%, go away. Here's my little life outside of that. Which means that when the power, as in Yanukovych's example, oversteps that boundary, people push back. Mm. That's why Ukraine has this amazing potential for protest. And Russia doesn't. It's no big deal to overturn the power. There's no deification of it. There's no identification with it. And if it misreads that border, it's lost.
In the case of Ukraine.
Yes. Yeah. However, this kind of anti-empire colonial pushback, which makes Ukraine so delightful and so rebellious and so impossible to control, which are good things, also makes it impossible to build strong institutions and a strong state. Because you would never go into the state if you're normal. Look at what happens to Yarosh, a hero on the Maidan. He enters The state, everyone hates him. Mustafa, Leshchenko, all these people who are kind of heroes become shits the moment they enter government. Very interesting to see what happens with Vakarchuk, this singer who's massively popular, about to enter politics. Will he be the first one who legitimizes the being in power? So because being inside power is seen as something negative a priori, it's stuck. It can push off colonialism, it can push off oppressors, but it can't build institutions. Weirdly enough, I think they had no problem with good colonialists coming. You know, foreigners from the West, Lithuanians, Georgians, Poles. That's fine. I mean, if the power is always a colonial one, it might as well be nice colonial. I mean, if there was ever a country that needed EU entry, it was Ukraine. But it's not going to happen soon. So I don't know, Ukraine's just stuck in this kind of paradox, going round and round and round. And I don't know what the solution is to that.
But maybe,
placed.
If you have something.
No, I have. Listen, first, I want to agree very much that Ukraine is one of those places you either know everything, you know nothing. And I'm not one of those who know much. But I very much agree with the following story, because this is the problem with the moral relativism when it comes to the Ukrainian-Russian story. You have two positions. One is that you have the Russian propaganda and the Ukrainian propaganda, and they're equally awful. And aesthetically speaking, for me this is true, with one small difference. Ukraine did not invade Russia and took their land. This is a small difference that makes the situation different. Otherwise, if you're listening the way the Ukrainians talk about the war history and so on, to be honest, the torture of the facts, and I'm not talking about some journalist or very decent media, I'm talking about government propaganda, because in Russia also there are journalists who are telling stories which are different than their government. But the difference on which I do believe Peter is putting there is, in Russia the identity of the citizen is very much related to a state. So here's my story. There was a guy who is a Russian American whom I know, and after Crimea he was flying to Moscow, he landed and he took a taxi. And he started talking, and the taxi driver was very unhappy with what's happening, and he said, I want to emigrate to the United States. And the guy said, listen, don't go to the States, it's economic crime, it's not the great moment, go to Canada. Canada is a better place to start your life. And then the taxi driver turned to him and said, listen, I cannot live in a country which is not a great power. and it works. Listen, it works just as an episode, but there is something about this. The identity, and I'm not saying this ironic, this is the story, I'm not saying this in order basically. The idea of identity is so important, and this explains for me one of the most important and paradoxical things that I notice in the turn between the protesting Russia of 2011, 2012, and basically the Russia that endorsed Crimea, the annexation of Crimea. The interesting story was that basically the key word in both cases was respect. People went on the street protesting in 2011 because basically Medvedev and Putin treated them totally disrespectfully. Two persons staying on the stage, and one said, do you know what, we met together and we decided that next 4 years I'm going to be a president, he's going to be a prime minister. Listen, this is, you just treat, this was even a bad show. And people had this problem of not being respected, the problem of pride. The pride of the Russian middle class, particularly of the Moscow and St. Petersburg middle class, was very much touched. It was not about economic interests. The people who have been on the streets cannot be basically described on the basis of economic protest. They had the feeling that they're living in a place which they're totally disrespected. And this came Crimea, and then Putin went and said, can you live in a world which nobody is respected as? Can you be a respected citizen in a state which is not respected? And here you have the sociological turn. Support for annexation of Crimea was very high, one of the highest, in the same places which most actively protested against Putin in 2011, 2012. So this idea and this course of respect and dignity and pride, which was very much shift from the pride of the individual to the pride of the state, become a major issue. And I do believe this explains partly even the situation now, because when people said the total Putin media explained this and that, I'm reading a lot of public opinion polls. When it comes to economy and their personal life, the total Russian media does not very much affect the way the people see the world. These same Russians that are watching this same Russian television, when they ask how corrupt their government is, they're saying that it's very corrupt, quite a lot. When they talk about the local governments, you cannot, on something that they have a personal experience. But when basically you jump on Ukraine, Syria, the world, the United States, European Union, you basically have a response which you're going to get basically watching television. So from this point of view, paradoxically, and this is my point on this, one of the interesting stories that we're living in the world in where the personal experience is covering so little of what we're doing, that you do not have a control. We had this talk with Tim Snyder several days ago, and he said something that I found very interesting. He said that probably part of the result, one of the reasons for the collapse of the trust of the media in the United States is the fact that for economic reasons in the last 10 years, local media has disappeared. There are no local newspapers anymore. Because trusting your local newspaper is very much about activating your personal experience. You know the people about which is said, and if somebody is going to say about your neighbor that he's, I don't know what, you say, no, it's not true, I know him. It's not the case now, where basically the personal experience matters in a very limited case, and you are either buying the story, and the story, of course, is not the whole story. You can go with your political parties, and of course, technology plays an important role, and all these echo chambers, but this is not based on experience anymore. And this is why anytime when you're touching on experience, people react totally different.
Yeah, like an experience with a crucified boy. But I think that's not really a case for Russia, because I think the Russian federal channels, I don't know, correct me if you think I'm wrong, the Russian federal channels have this meta-narrative, military narrative, where the small person is basically missing. And it's more about the state and the thing that the state do and geopolitics. So it also lacks this human, basic human approach, but at the same time, there's quite a still, I didn't look at the numbers, but there's quite still big trust in federal media among Russians.
Yeah, but you have to look at different opinion polls in Russia. So I remember Kirill Rogov, a wonderful Russian political scientist, gave a great presentation in London saying, yeah, trust in media and Putin is up. But also there's another poll showing, do you trust what people say publicly? Really down.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're into like a very strange game of polling when it comes to Russia. Look, this trust question is key. How do you generate trust? Yeah? And listen, if any of you have ever been at an awful corporate weekend team building exercise, which I've had to fucking do, but look, the principle is right. They get you to do things together. Yeah? It's that simple. That's the only way you generate trust. If we want media to be trusted again, they have to start doing things together with people. Now, sadly, this is sometimes translated into citizen journalism, which is the biggest bullshit I have ever heard. That's like saying citizen nursing. Let's get someone to be a nurse. No, journalism is a profession. You can't have citizen journalists. But you can get people involved, and most important, it's the sense that you're doing something for them, that you are seeing the world from their point of view, that you are their representative in many ways. And we have completely lost touch of that. I was in Iowa recently, and it's so true. You switch on the TV. Everything is New York elites talking to LA elites, talking to Washington, D.C. There's nothing from the point of view of Iowa. And at least there's Fox News there, who's also in New York. But they spend all their time saying how horrible the other channels are. Yeah? And this, I think, is very important. This is the cynical way to win trust. In a world where we're surrounded by screens, one of the few ways you can be with the viewer is by watching TV with him. So this is what Fox News does all the time. They spend half their coverage talking about NBC and something else, yeah? So they are placing themselves next to the viewer watching TV with him. They're at least representing him that way, and they're building identity that way. Trump does this all the time. Trump is not just a transmitter of news, he's watching TV all the time and talking about it. You're watching it with him. There's a hit show in Britain called Gogglebox, which is basically just shows people watching TV and commenting on it. That's one of the ways you can steal trust and identity in a world of many, many different media, which of course by its very idea fences off the idea of discourse, because you're saying we are that which watches all the other channels and hates them. But that's what happens if you don't have, that's the cynical and very easy way to create a sense of belonging and trust. Putting yourself on the TV couch with people in Iowa.
On this, I do believe that also one of the things that happened is that because of the fact that our society has become much freer, and the radicalism became a low-cost radicalism, people are saying everything. Very radical stuff. Listen, when Nietzsche was saying that God is dead, for him this was painful, it was a kind of metaphysical, he cannot live with the idea that God is dead. There was an existential crisis. So now you have basically very secular people going and saying God is dead, and they want it to be treated like Nietzsche. and this cannot be like this. It cannot be like this. So from this point of view, I do believe that one of the things that is going on the trust is people more and more start to say who is speaking. And from this point of view, taking personal risks, this is why, strangely enough, we associate post-truth with war. But war is one of the places where words has consequences. Some people go and die, some people are taking risks, and these people are treated differently. Talking about the elites, have you seen that all over the world, one of the most trusted elites, one of the most mistrusted elites today are the people of words. I mean, put it academic journalists. The mistrust of media in the United States is higher than mistrust in government. The most trusted elites are the military elites. By the way, if you see the number of people also from the military going into the American administration, if it was Russia, we're going to call it the rise of Siloviki. Why? Because basically you believe that they have a different type of experience which goes with risk. They have been risking something, they're doing something, they're taking care of other people. And I do believe that this story that I'm not ready to trust particularly radical saying from somebody who does not have skin in the game is becoming very strong. And this is quite interesting. I was even seeing this, and I don't know if Chantal is going to agree, but the one interesting story about Macron is he had a personal story. It was not so much about political ideas. People are not discussing labor reforms when they talk about people. He did something that for certain type of a group, marrying a person which was kind of a social risk in the type of an environment, staying with this decision and enjoying this, create a story that you can tell. And this is not the story of political achievements, but this is a kind of a story of a personal daring, and you have a story. And from this point of view, I do believe it's not by accident that journalists that we start to trust are people who have a story. A journalist who has been put in prison for his story is a different journalist than basically the journalist who is writing this and that. And I do believe that this personal experience, and of course this very Foucaultian story that taking risk is what is allowing you basically to talk truth and people to believe you, is coming back also. So probably this is the other way of building trust in a society in which any radical statement does not have.
Yeah, but here's
meaning.
where trust is tricky in Ukraine as well. If you look at the Ukrainian polls, the most trusted institution in Ukraine is armed forces after the church. Then you have the NGOs. Armed forces is 53%. Then you have the NGOs is 30-something. Then you have media, which is quarter, 25%. And then you have president and the parliament. And parliament is less than 5, I think.
Why so high?
Well, I have no idea. But so they do trust the military, and they trust what they say, and they read what the military and the volunteers. Sorry, I missed also the volunteers. It's also, they have also quite high percentage of trust, and they read them on Facebook, and this is their new media. They read personally their Facebook accounts, and Facebook in Ukraine is maybe a little bit different than in other European countries. It's like every politician and every volunteer and every minister has a Facebook account, and they use it for news, for statements, for interaction with electorate or whatever. And people are reading and sharing their posts, and that's their media now. Why should they go and watch news if they have the president speaking to them directly through Facebook Live? Or why should they believe the media if they have a very well-known military volunteer who is now working with the Ministry of Defense talking to them directly through Facebook? And of course then they have this little and very cozy Facebook community, echo chamber or whatever you call it, with all the guys who sympathize that circle and they stay there. So it's really hard to penetrate that bubble and get them listen to the news.
But then this is of course very interesting because they want to have something personal, but this is also some of the strange paradox. For example, this is the Putin phenomenon. If you go on the opinion polls, President Putin is not treated as somebody who is alive. He's not a political person anymore. He's treated as a historical personality. No irony in what I'm saying. Go on the polls. In a certain way, normally in the polls, your support or the lack of support is very much reflecting of what you're doing in real life, particularly in the last 2 weeks. This does not affect the president, and strangely enough, he cannot transfer trust to anybody else. He's treated in the way you can treat God, you can treat Tsar, but somebody who is not part of the political system, you do not have a relationship of he's doing something and this is why I trust him or not. After Crimea, he entered history textbooks, and from there he talks as a kind of a historical person to people alive. This is why, by the way, this is also the paradox of the system, that paradoxically the huge trust in President Putin is becoming the major problem, structural problem for the post-Putin Russia. Because the legitimacy is so much around the person, and of course the medicine is going very far away, but at least if you work with the idea, with the assumption of mortality, this is an issue. This is an issue. And I'm saying this because this is the interesting story. You have a new understanding of what is a charismatic leader in the time of Facebook. Mm-hmm. And the charismatic leader is becoming not simply a political leader from this point of view. President Trump is incredible on the level of the tweets, because what is the tweets? You have what the government is doing, and then you have the guy who is tweeting. And what he's tweeting can be very different what the government is doing, which is also creating a very interesting ambiguity. For example, the government is siding with Qatar, but the president is siding with Saudi Arabia in his tweet. And this is interesting, particularly in a political system which is highly personalized. And I do believe here is also the technology questions that we didn't talk, and of course many people are talking about. But it is technology that destroys a certain understanding of authority. Before, the idea was that the power knows more than you know. I noticed something very good about these tweets and Facebooks and others. It's much easier, and I know some people, to get out of government. Before, a minister getting out of government, the first 6 months, he's unbearable. He goes, he's very kind of unhappy all the time, basically, because he used to certain flow of information that kept him important, and when this flow of information is cut, there is an existential crisis. And now he leaves the government and nothing is changing. Basically, the American president and all of us are going to learn about the terrorist act in Manchester at the same time. And in the first 30 minutes, we're going basically to know equally the same. And this type of asymmetrical power of information, which was so typical for the relations between power and citizens, has disappeared. And this is why I do believe this also explains part of the mystery of power has disappeared. The power of people that used to know things that we don't know, and now we are the one that know things that they don't know. And I find this, at least for me, there is something with this change of the flow of information that is totally changing the relations of the citizen to power.
So you mean all these stories, there's an obsession in the media at the moment that sort of various political groups and campaigns have knowledge of data, which gives them insight into society, which is bullshit, actually. If you understand how data works, that's not how it works. So that's a form of nostalgia. That's us wanting to give power real power again. That might be part of it.
Yeah. Sorry, I've been just informed that we have only 5 minutes left just here, but then we will have to switch to
Was it a
questions.
true statement that you got?
I don't know. You see, you never know.
Yeah.
You never know. So maybe we could also talk. About a phenomenon term called computational propaganda, and something on the way internet is engineered or not engineered, automatized or not automatized to, distress people or to make them change, to change the public opinion. Mm-hmm. Peter, I think you've looked into that, no?
Well, computational propaganda just usually refers to the use of bots, yeah? So it's the use of not people doing the propaganda, but robots doing it. Now, this always has this slightly, like all things to do with robots, Central European, sort of like turn of the century, sense, Stanislav Lem and Čapek, exactly. So always when I hear about bots taking over the world, I'm like, yeah, we've been here before, and it's kind of true. It's such an old fantasy that repeats over and over. But steps are being taken forward. So, and it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. So one of my favorite guys who works in this is someone called Tim Hwang, this is a guy who, he'd already had 1 degree from Harvard. He went to Stanford and did a law degree in order to prove that he could do half the degree with bots that he'd created automatically. Wow. He did 50% of the degree that way. So he has something called Pacific Social, which apart from all the money he earns, I don't know, for doing something else, he kind of has these bot competitions. And he set up a bot competition, and don't quote me on this, I mean, I'm roughly remembering a conversation I had with him. So you can go back and research the exact specifics, but basically set up a competition for different bot makers to try to target people who believed in medical conspiracies, try to engage them in conversation. And there were different strategies that the bots took. Some tried to bombard them with information. Others designed this bot, which is essentially a psychoanalytic bot. It would just go, what do you want to talk about? How interesting. Really? Here's something I read about it. And kind of it machine learns to repeat stuff that people were saying to it. So basically the guy who heads one of these big medical conspiracy sites, and it's a site which is very dangerous that says that you can't take vaccines because they'll damage your child. So look, there's real problems in America, like flu epidemics, based on this conspiratorial bullshit. And a lot of these people are very religious as well. So the guy was so convinced that the bot was real, he spent a day trying to convert it to Christianity. So look, these bots could be used for really good things. I know people who work in de-radicalization. And the only real way we know is engagement online, literally one-on-one stuff. So, you see someone's being radicalized by ISIS, you kind of approach them online saying, look, it's usually a former radical, I've been radicalized before, let's talk about this. This is the only way that really works. These kind of tweet campaigns the State Department does is bullshit. It's that one-on-one things. But they say, look, I can't do 300,000 people being recruited by ISIS. I need bots to start the conversations and get halfway through and I can jump in. So bots are neither good nor bad. They throw up a lot of ethical questions. If we're trying to fight fake news, are we right in using kind of bots pretending to be humans? But I wouldn't be scared of bots. They can be used for good or bad. There's obviously they can spread lies at an incredible rate as well. I know Tim Hwang at the moment is working on a bot that would move between polarized groups, let's say pro-Israelis and pro-Palestinians. And we really see, there was always a hope, ridiculously, the internet would help with the Israeli-Palestinian problem. It helps as much as Jared Kushner helps. So basically it's become very radicalized. You can really see it in the Twitter sphere. There used to be points of communication, it's like this now. So you try to invent bots that will move between the two groups automatically find things they're both interested in and start building bridges between them. I mean, that's fantastic.
Wow.
So we can do such good things with bots, but obviously the potential to do evil with them is massive, he said with some joy. But so look, this is just the next phase. I'm not a technophobe. I think we have to embrace this. Journalists have to embrace this. Journalists have to start to use the data analytics tools, which are currently being used by campaigns. That's what we're doing at the LSE. I think we've just got to dive in and embrace this stuff.
Yeah. Just one on this, because the most interesting, and for social scientists this is extremely interesting, because for democracy, big data. So let's put from the position of the consultant of a campaign, and this cannot go everywhere. It goes only in the countries in which you have a really big data, like the United States. The problem with the big data is it's patterns. If I know what you're consuming, what kind of dresses you're buying, what kind of films you're watching, what kind of books you're doing, if I know your previous vote and so on, with a quite highly likelihood, for example, I can say that there are 83% that you're going to vote for this party or the other party. And then this is, in my view, this is the real problem. You don't have undecided voters anymore from the point of view of the consultant. Consultant goes and said the following: this is potentially my guy. The problem is how to get him to vote and how to get the other guy not to vote. And then you don't go not political. So from this point of view, it's only mobilization. And here how it works. The book which was really important in order to understand how it functions, all this, is so-called Nudge, Sustain, and others, which basically this is a behaviorist economist, which is making the following statement. You know, if you know that all of your neighbors are going to vote, the chance for you voting increases by 40%. So if I know that you're basically a non-politically engaged, so your chance to vote is not high, but at the same time that if you're going to vote for me, my basic problem is how to get you to vote. And then you're not going to receive any political letter based on issues. I'm not going to tell you anything about gay marriages and so on. I'm simply going to send you a letter from a community organization telling you that, do you know that 100% of your neighbor has committed themselves to vote? And this is how the consultant starts to approach. This is why the big money are becoming so important in politics. But as a result of it, there is no discussion anymore. You don't try to persuade anybody on type of issues. You're trying to mobilize certain type of prejudices. And I want to stop to this because the interesting story about big data is big data has quite a lot of strong projective power. You really can forecast things. The one thing that big data does not give you is the explanation why. Big data is a knowledge without why. You don't know why he's doing this, and you're not interested in why. And from this point of view, I do believe this is also very much changing politicians. When you read about this Cambridge Analytica and what they did for Trump, go 4 years before and read the 1% doctrine, saying how people were fascinated that the same type of techniques have been used for Obama to win. So from this point of view, we're changing our perspective on technology. Are we winning or losing in the current elections? But I do believe that the political consultants are very much moving in this big data story. They're starting to mobilize prejudice. They're mobilizing certain type of things. And as a result of it, political argument and political debate is losing its meaning in politics. People are faking dialogue while the votes are gathered in a different way. And this is, for me, is the big challenge for democracies. I mean, where you have a competitive elections and where people are doing things.
I mean, the way campaigns work now is because campaigns do look at social media so much, they don't really have time to get into a lot of the consumer data anymore. We've gone through 3 phases with campaigns. It used to be campaigns used to perceive voters in terms of, in Britain, their class, the newspaper you read, or A1, A, B, A, C, sort of very rich, bit poorer, but and so on, economic scale. Then they started to look at the voter in terms of essentially consumer profile. This is sort of the Blairite years. There's just centrism. Government is just a public service, and they're consumers. So you define people by, the cars they drive. Mondeo Man we had in Britain, or whether they eat anchovies. All this consumer data was very important. Now that's actually not that important. You usually try to perceive the electorate now by social media cohorts, by their causes. So animal rights, or whatever, or the NHS, or immigration. And then your job as a campaigner is to take every one of those cohorts and reel them in to your new identity, which has to be created. So that's what Brexit did very well. They took completely different interests, one of which was immigration. Animal rights they did really well. They managed to convince them the EU was bad for animal rights, got all the animal rights people.
And the NHS. And the NHS.
And the NHS and everything else. You bring them into an identity. Ideology can't even come into this. If you do ideology, that's one group, you're going to lose the rest. So you have to bring them in. And actually the main book they always quote is Chantal and Mouffe.
She's here.
Oh,
be
really?
careful, be careful.
Well, that's what I've been told. Wow, I'm so honored.
Which book?
A lot of the early ones, actually. So I've had Brexit people quote it to me. Yes. Oh, no, the right can use it as well as the left.
Exactly.
Wow, is that you? Oh my God, I'm so honored. That's so exciting. I have so many questions for you. I've just got off the back of like a huge research project talking to campaign
Chantal, you know that it is staged. We prepared.
Yeah, no, this is
no, I'm joking.
No, but that's what they do. They really quote that, and in a very vulgar way, I'm sure. And it's all about, you know, taking these different social cohorts we found online and putting them into new identity, the many, the people, whatever. So that's kind of how they operate now.
Absolutely.
So there's a real limit to a lot of this data that everybody's very paranoid about. It's very hard for a campaign, even if they know that you eat anchovies, and that probably means you'll vote Republican, which is one of the weird correlations. It's very hard for them to use that in any kind of big practical way. But the problem is that debate completely disappears.
Totally.
You don't want to bring these people into a debate. That would be very destructive. So I was covering the British election now extensively. And it's very interesting what's happened to journalists. So back in the 1990s, there was a bus for journalists. A whole bus. Alistair Campbell would bring Tony Blair to talk to every media person and to kind of seduce them, because they were trying to win the centre, win over the other media. Then they got rid of the bus. But there was still a debate. There was a debate that we had, and the different party leaders would debate with each other. Now there's no debate. Basically, the poor journalists get nothing from them anymore because they don't care. They can just talk to their various groups. They have newspapers which will amplify them to talk to various groups. And the last thing they want is to have a meaningful conversation. And so the media has fallen away. And this computes into how many questions they're allowed to ask. Theresa May wasn't even letting journalists into the places she was doing events. Labour were giving a little drip just to people they liked. And the poor journalists were so sad and depressed and like, we've got to bring people out onto the streets, but sadly they're not trusted anymore.
But because this is when we talk about, there are a lot of people that have been working on populism. Traditionally, and not in a negative, populism is kill the middleman. The middleman can be a trader, a merchant. But this is an idea of a kind of a much more direct representation in which the representatives are not going to use their power. And media is part of the middleman. So you have middlemen being killed in economy. Uber, what is Uber? You're killing the middleman. What is this Airbnb? You're killing the middleman. You don't need a middleman to interpret you the reality anymore. You want basically directly to go. And I do believe part of the story is that some of this pluralistic society that we know was produced, strangely enough, by the middleman. In the way part of the interesting story also in the economy was produced by the middleman and not directly between the producer and the consumer. And I find this is also changing. This is why it's not simply technology. Technology makes it possible, but it goes beyond a very old desire to have a direct relationship, no middleman, no representation.
I think we have to extend our conversation to the audience. And we have the mic. Holly, you have.
Thanks so much. First of all, to the first issue of Eastern and Western Europe, the post-truth matter, I wonder why it is that if it was the Western European model that ended up prevailing, that it's precisely the former dissidents who defected, people like Kaczynski and Orban, from the, they still use the truth model, the phenomenological version where they speak the truth, but they are precisely the ones who are held up as the exemplars of those who have abandoned so-called an interest in truth per se, even though their rhetoric is the same. My second question is, it's more about this matter of the local media. I think what you're saying about the disappearance of local media is true, but not in the way that you think. I used to work for a small paper in South Dakota, and my first assignment was to cover Tom Daschle's Democratic senator's visit to the Shriners Convention. And I asked him about his healthcare plan. And I wrote up what he said about the healthcare plan. And all of these letters poured in saying, I didn't know that Tom Daschle had a federal plan for healthcare, and why are we talking about this and not the Shriners? And my editor called me in and said, you know, like when you talk to Tom Daschle and he's in this town, you talk about, you know, maybe farm subsidies, but mostly the Shriners, and you mention 3 names. And so what the local population learned from my paper was that Tom Daschle also did other stuff, that he had a federal plan for healthcare. And this is sort of what now happens. I mean, sort of this simultaneity problem whereby people now know that Tom Daschle is not just about farm subsidies and family values. He's also about a national plan for healthcare. And it goes back to this issue of differentials in knowledge and power. And I'm wondering also, is it sometimes necessary for there to be a level of competency that's one up from the one that, you know, is it necessary for there to be 2 levels of politics? The local level where people concern themselves with farm subsidies, but then the federal level where healthcare happens without necessarily everyone trying to chime in on a healthcare debate. And I'm wondering if the disappearance of the local media precisely took away these 2 levels and turned it into essentially one. My very last question is about, I sent something in kind of the excitement about technology. Also, there's sort of a cynical Machiavellianism about the possibilities, and it's thrilling on the one hand, but on the other, isn't this a kind of our attempt to recreate a power differential in which we can be the ones who know more, to the extent that it depends on people not knowing that these are bots. And pretty soon they're going to know that they're bots. And not only that, they're going to think that everything is a bot. And then what?
Peter.
I can talk. I don't know. I can just help with the last one. So the big thing that's changed. We talk about what's changed between Soviet times and now. The big thing that's changed is that we used to have the idea of a propagandist who, you know, ran a TV station, was minister of propaganda, blasting out propaganda, and a propagandee, the audience. I think that's gone now. Now everybody is simultaneously a propagandist and a propagandee, creating propaganda, sharing it, tweeting about it. So we're all kind of in this messy world where we're using each other and manipulating each other. I'm not quite sure where that ends up. But this last question, you know, not only will we think everything is a bot, we'll all be creating bots as well. So we're into this very, very messy world where I don't think we've even started to sort out what the rules are. So yeah, I just got back from a conference this morning in Berlin where, you know, Germans were trying to think this through. We didn't get anywhere. But
exactly, because I do believe that there is the one thing. We are moving from something that was kind of a regular war. You have the army of one side, you have the army of the other side, they're doing this and that. And as a result of it, you also can have a management of a conflict. What, to be honest, scared me most about the story with the hacking of the campaign of Hillary Clinton was the following. I just trying to imagine that I'm one of these super smart kids in Stanford who didn't vote for Trump, who believed that basically the Russians elected his president, who hates this very moment what this president is doing. What is going to come to his mind? He also knows certain things about computer. What he's going to do in revenge. And what basically the Russian guy staying there then is going to do. Is it going to be about some nuclear power station trying to block it? Because you can do this. And from this point of view, I do believe that the most important is Cold War was also about states controlling. This is the difference between cyber war. You have the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb is coming, and only states has control, and not only states, but very few states. And you really can negotiate, and nevertheless, how you hate each other, there is control. And then you have a situation in which the person is really, the individual, the citizens, particularly the gifted people with this technological stuff became very important. And it is a partisan war. And in this partisan war, you want to make a difference because your way of life was threatened. This is not a crazy people. I'm not talking about kind of crazies. And I do believe this changes the world totally. Exactly, there is no any more supplier of propaganda, consumer of propaganda, If you're a good consumer of propaganda, you become supplier immediately. You want basically also to do something. If you start to believe that this is the world you want to change, others to start to believe it. And I do believe we're not prepared for this world in which it's a guerrilla war. It's not basically the type of story that we know from before.
You want to also address the question about, I think, first dissidents, yes, and also local media?
Here I could be wrong, and I do believe that democracy never was equality about knowledge. It was that our experience are equally valuable and that I know my experience better than anybody else. But then in the discourse, egalitarian discourse, the more unequal our societies are becoming on the level of income and others, the more we started to pretend that we treat people as equally intelligent. There is something very fake about this. Basically, people have you have a growing gap between the resources which people are using, but the official discourse is that people are equally competent. So people are interested, in my view, about medicine. I don't have a view on medicine. I don't understand anything. This is a professional story. People have been invested. There is a certain level of competence. I have my experience, and I do believe that I know how I feel, and I don't want politicians to tell me how to feel. But to pretend that people can have an opinion on a highly professional stories like building a bridge and treating it seriously and discussing, consulting citizens on this and that, in my view, this created this fake understanding that we all equally know even about very specialized subjects. And this is why the professionals started to be highly mistrusted. I'm not talking only about politicians. And Google also created this story because you can go and you can check for yourself and you're always going to have somebody who is closer to you. So I do believe that there is a major crisis of authority, and this crisis of authority very much took the idea and basically is discussed in terms of post-truth, because there is a very strong correlations between the idea of authority and the idea of what we accept as being true for concrete situation and concrete fields.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question?
My name is Gemma Pölzke, and I'm a journalist from Germany, and I have just listening to you, I would like to know, isn't it on just time of change? I mean, because it's quite pessimistic, the outlook you gave, but sometimes looking at the situation in Germany, I had the feeling that when Trump was elected, things have really changed since then. A lot of people got more serious. We have people entering parties, not at big scale, but they do. I mean, they were very much involved in Germany in the refugee crisis. Yeah? A lot of ordinary people on the street. We have a huge amount of people active in NGOs, not in the traditional political parties. And I agree that that debate has very much changed, and we as journalists play very different roles now than we played before. But my feeling is as well that it's good that we are more criticized. I mean that it's more difficult, getting more difficult to be too elitist, to be too close to politicians, because people feel this, and that there is a potential as well of more democracy as well, having people. Especially in the social networks, playing a role and building up roles. I mean, we have young people even having YouTube channels, which are much more influential than any of our newspapers. So I'm just not so pessimistic, and I would like to know what you think about it. I mean, I think we agree that it's changed, but has it been really such a dark picture? I mean,
can I quickly get it as a media representative as well? I wouldn't say I am pessimistic. Yeah. I mean, I'm thrilled to working during this time. I think it's a huge challenge, and it's so exciting. I have no feeling that we are operating in like absolutely dark times or in dark waters.
It's a transitional time. That's my feeling.
I don't know, but at least I'm not pessimistic.
Listen, I didn't know that I'm pessimistic. I'm Bulgarian, so from this point of view, it goes to his nationality. No, listen, first of all, I do believe that the world we have is the result of our successes, not of our failures, and this is the major story. This is what we wanted. Basically, much more empowered citizen, emancipation, and so on. On the other side, I do believe that simply saying activism is great, but it's not enough. And here is my counterexample. If you listen to the talk of the social movements, particularly 2010, 11, Occupy movements, Europe, the United States, and there was talk about networks and leaderless movements and others, the only two political projects of any electoral weight that came out of this, Podemos and Syriza, they're very traditionally organized with the political leaders. In the case of Podemos, he was even on the ballot box, in the ballot when they have been voting. So from this point of view, I do believe that at certain type, just falling in love with the experience of being empowered and exercising power. And I agree very much. Political activism, even civil society activism. Weimar Germany was one of the countries with the highest percent of civic organizations and so on. And this was not the way to stop fascism, but in a certain way helped it, because many of these sport, gymnastic, sport clubs and others have been the place where this type have been socialized. So from this point of view, I see the activism slightly in the way I see technology. I do believe it's a politically neutral in a way. Activism can be activism for a positive development of society. It could be negative. Tea Party movement was a very genuine grassroots organization which you can really celebrate if you're only about activism. Some of the results probably you're not going to be very happy about. So this is why I don't believe that just celebrating activism is enough. But this is probably this is where my pessimism stays.
Yeah, I mean, I gave lots of the boss examples. I think there's so much to do. I'm half Russian, half British, so I'm torn between, positivism, being optimistic and negative.
I think we have also another question.
Okay, let me follow up on Holly's comment in a slightly different way, and then go back to Nietzsche. No, because Nietzsche's not dead. So, when I listen to the two of you, I think, okay, what's Krastev's internet profile, right? Zero. He's not on the internet. And what's Pomerantsev's internet profile? Well, it's entertaining, it's brilliant, and it's constantly self-tortured with sort of Pomerantsev again and again coming back to the question of, am I being fooled, and am I thinking too much about this, and what do you guys think? Am I thinking too much? And this raises for me a comparison which I would like to try out on the two of you, which has to do with power, which has come up in a number of ways, and time on the internet. It seems to me that the most powerful people are the ones who spend the least time on the internet. And one can anecdotally toss this around. So for example, all the Google people send their kids to schools where they're banned from using the internet. The people at the top of Google basically do not use the internet at all, right? Maybe 2 or 3 minutes a day. And so the comparisons I would suggest would be, so we all think we're smart, right? And the fact that you think you're smart is your weakness. It's almost everybody's weakness. And when you walk into the stock market, right, you think you're smart, and that's how you get killed. Or when you walk into a casino, you think you're smart, and that's how you get killed. And I think the internet is a bit like that. Many of us think we're smart enough to use the internet, and 99% of us, let's say, are wrong. And the more time so it's like a casino or like the stock market in that you get drawn into it by people who know the rules of it better than you do. You have a feeling of comfort, which is created for you while you're inside the internet. And the longer you're there, the more you lose. Right? Maybe not your money, but probably your mind, right? And so what I want to toss out is in this future of bots, lovable or unlovable bots, it's going to be the people who are on the internet the least who are the ones who have the power. And I think the world is actually already like that. It's the people who are least on the internet who have the power. Nietzsche. So Nietzsche's not dead. Nietzsche's not dead. So because God isn't either. Because which means they're still talking to each other. There's a slight Enlightenment bias. I'm going to do like my Midwestern Christian thing now. There's a slight Enlightenment bias in this conversation, which was when trust breaks, it has to break into distrust. which is the Russian story, and I can do that story too. So trust breaks into distrust. You don't believe anything, and therefore you prefer your own lies to other people's lies, and therefore you can have postmodern nationalism, which is true and elegant, and it's happening. But there's another story, which is that trust in intermediate authorities breaks down, but trust as such does not go away. There's maybe still a constant amount of trust, but that trust starts to look more like faith, right? So it's not that trust breaks down to little pieces, it's actually that trust reconsolidates into faith. And so that people who, treat Putin like a dead czar, or people who treat Trump, right, like even though he contradicts himself the way that a God does, right? Anyone who bothers to read the Old Testament realizes that God is like Trump. He's constantly sending messages down from above. It contradicts from day to day, like today's friend, right? You open a hole in the ground for the guy
burning tweet.
Yeah. So you open a hole in the ground for the guy who you loved yesterday, right? It's just, so in a way, faith prepares you for all this. And so maybe you could actually hold trust constant and say it's not that trust goes away. It's that some of it fragments into nothing and into distrust and cynicism and so on. But some of it becomes faith. And that helps to explain Putin's popularity. It also helps to explain the durability of Trump's support. So that category of faith, and hence Nietzsche, hence God.
Listen, I'm very, very much on your side, because I do believe that when we talk about trust, mystery and power cannot be divorced. Transparent power is not power. If you basically understand totally the people who governs you, he's not governing you. If he's totally naked for you. And from this point of view, it's very interesting, because the government always has the utopia. It's Bentham's panopticon. This is the naked citizen. You can see it. You control all these dangerous individuals. Now we went in the utopia of a totally naked government. We're going to know why they're doing, how they're going to. But there is nothing more suspicious than a government that claims it's transparent. Imagine basically a president who comes and tells you, I'm telling you everything that you should know. And this is the moment you stop trusting him totally. I'm saying this because I agree with you on religion, and this is true. All these our conversations are very much from a certain type of a secular, and here Eastern Europe, particularly our part, is very strong. It's post-ideological, but people start to believe, and they believe not on the base of facts. What I wanted to share, I was on some discussion on Skype with Snowden, and Snowden was saying something that struck me. This was the first time I understand religion. He was telling all the time that never in history people have been so much surveilled. He said, never people. And I was shocked, because it's not true. If you're a religious person, the God is even seeing your thoughts. From the point of view of the consumer of surveillance, God is worse. God is worse. So from this point of view, we start with the idea that basically this is not anymore. And in fact, this is why I do believe that probably here, America and Europe are going different. And Russia, from this point of view, was very interesting. Because even when they talk God, this is not this type of a trust-building story. And I very much agree that this is very much about President Putin. Stalin used to speak very rarely. And he was using the Marxist language in which you don't know, is he speaking, is the theory speaking, is Lenin speaking, is Marx speaking. So it was his silences that have been basically read and interpreted and so on and so on. In the case of Trump, can you hear anybody interpreting the silences of Trump? There is no silence, and I do believe this is the major kind of a change of power. The power that cannot be silent cannot be efficient. I very much agree with Tim on this, yeah.
Just very briefly, when I went to the Donbass and I was looking at people in the middle of the information war who get bombarded from every side, and it's true, at one point, it was almost visual. Their picture of the world as a kind of post-Renaissance painting, like here is authority, here is the sky, here is the earth, as something reasoned, had broken down. And certainly the way they used conspiracies was as pseudo-religious. It's all been decided up there, they'd say. I'm like, where? Up there somewhere. So completely you had a rational mind, an enlightenment thinking, buckling, and something medieval emerging. There's some very powerful paintings about the Donbass by a painter whose name I've forgotten, I'll send you on later, who depicts the whole of the Donbass as these crazy icons with miners and what would you call it? And these kind of like little green men. And I think he really, really gets it. Yes, so that's something that we will. That's something that's emerging. If the Donbass is the future of the whole world, which it might be.
There was a famous Russian poet who died, Dmitry Prigov, conceptualist poet, extremely gifted, and he had a story of the Kulikov battle in the 14th century told from the position of God. And this is one of the most amazing poems. So he basically said, okay, let's decide who should win. Let's Tatars win. Because Tatars are nice people and so on and so on. But on the other side, the Russians, why Russians should lose? And in a certain way, as you know, this is the battle that never took place. In a certain way, they stayed. And all this is told from the God not being able to decide who is going to win. And I do believe that we're very much in this situation.
Okay, and on that note, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I really want to thank Peter and Ivan and all of you who came and the Institute. I hope we can talk somewhere here while still we're all going away. Yes. Downstairs. Wine and cheese. Wine and cheese. Wow, that's perfect. So we can continue there. Thank you so much.